Welcome back. It's great to have an actual beekeeper in our hive. Thank you for being here. Dr. Buddy Marterre is one of the very few to be duly certified in both surgery and hospice and palliative medicine, and has recently completed his Master of Divinity at Wake Forest. Thank you very much for being here, Buddy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, Debbie. It's a real pleasure and a real honor. I hope I hope that folks get something out of this. So I guess we'll start with the first slide here. We're going to talk about spiritual suffering in HD caregivers. So this slide talks about the mother of the hospice movement, Dame Cicely Saunders, coined this term total pain. And she describes total pain as being both physical pain, which includes other symptoms, which in HD, of course, would be all of the physical symptoms that go along with it, as well as social pain, psychological pain, and spiritual pain. So there's overlap in these four areas, of course: grief, anxiety, anger. Although they're listed there under psychological pain, of course, have a spiritual component. And a lot of the forms of connectedness loss, be that within your family or outside your family, as well as your role in society or your role in your family, all of that can be related to grief and can work its way into, if you will, spiritual pain. So the first question is, what is spirituality? What is spirit? Can we even define spirit? It's such an ephemeral thing that there's really not good words for it. But I think for the purposes of studying it, looking at it, it's very important to at least try. So the first thing to know here is that spirituality is intrinsically human. George Hanzo down there at the bottom is the executive director of the Healthcare Chaplaincy Network, and he says to be human is to be spiritual. It's a dynamic process, and there are really four major themes, those being meaning making, purpose, connectedness, and transcendence, with or without a relationship with what most of us call God, the sacred, some of us might call ultimate meaning or reality. So this is kind of an overview of a study that I did, and in conjunction with Debbie Fox Davis and some other folks, looking at the literature in spiritual suffering, grief, loss, and coping. And you can see that there's a lot of overlap there. The grief components that we will touch on are anticipatory grief and ambiguous loss of an HD loved one. But most of the talk will be over there on the left-hand side of the slide, the components of spiritual suffering. And then we'll just also touch a little bit on creative transcendent coping, because that's something that's not mentioned very often in the literature, and I think a lot of doctors are not fully aware of. So before we leave this slide, we'll just talk a little bit about the ambiguous loss. Ambiguous loss is when you grieve the personhood or identity of your loved one. It's typically when there's physical presence, except there's cognitive, affective, or behavioral decline, which can lead to, in what we call in the medical community, disenfranchised grief. Disenfranchised grief is a grief that's not typically openly acknowledged, it's not socially sanctioned, or publicly mourned. So, for instance, a spousal caregiver may feel trapped and say, "This is not the person I married." Or they may ruminate about their loved one before certain aspects of their loved one's disease manifest. Creative transcendent coping, just to shift gears a touch before we leave this slide, is seeking peace, self-awareness, forgiveness, grace, love, accepting reality, and using meaning reconstruction, meaning making, purpose reconstruction, and hope reframing. So now we'll talk about the five types of spiritual suffering. Meaning distress is struggling with meaninglessness in life, or personal suffering, or vicarious suffering, suffering alongside your HD loved one. Seriously questioning the meaning in life, such as why me? Why him? Why her? And this is something, meaning distress seems so simple, and, but it's very easy for it to go unrecognized, and you may not even question it. And yet, meaning making is foundational to who we are as human beings and how we cope with life's challenges. And the absence of meaning making thwarts the work that we need to do to deal with anticipatory grief or disenfranchised grief, as well as our self image distress work. Meaninglessness also cultivates hopelessness. So it's divine or transpersonal suffering. That's feeling a divine detachment or alienation. So if you're a theist, if you believe in God, then feeling God has abandoned you, angry at you, punishing you, judging you, or your HD loved one. You may have a shattered God image or a shattered worldview if you're an atheist or a non theist and don't have a belief in God. You may still get a shattered worldview. Unresolved anger or bitterness towards God, questioning cosmic justice or fairness. So these are some representative quotes that came from some of the studies that we reviewed. God doesn't have a plan. He just sets everything up and away we go. Yes, your sister lost the lottery. That's, obviously a child talking to their parent, and their sister had just had a genetic test that came back positive for Huntington's disease. Existential angst and uncertainty is another form of spiritual distress. And this can manifest as hopelessness or despair. Typical quotes are, "I'm scared of being like mom. I'm on a never ending, relentless journey towards his death. What the hell am I going to do? She hasn't got her husband anymore. It's just her and the two children. So I worry constantly." And then, particularly poignant for HD caregivers or folks that are affected by HD, is grave anxiety associated with genetic testing, either for yourself or vicariously for one of your loved ones. So this is a quote from a child. "I think I'd feel a lot of guilt if I were gene negative, because even though I dodged a bullet, my brother and sister are still in the firing line. And I wouldn't breathe easy until I knew they didn't have it." Disrupted religious relationships is another type of spiritual suffering. And this comes from spiritual or religious tensions and conflicts, either with family, friends, or faith leaders or faith communities. You may feel hurt or offended by failures within your faith community. You may feel condemned for being angry at God. And anger at God isn't tolerated well by some faith communities, particularly a lot of Christian groups. They don't know what to do with anger at God. Whereas Anger at God is normalized in other faith communities, typically a lot of Jewish groups, um, Jewish faith communities. Anger at God is normal. It's expected. It's part of your Jewishness, if you will. Feeling excluded from groups, being gossiped about, not having been openly supported without bias or judgment. And so a typical comment here is people at church brushed it off with, God will provide a miracle. And they weren't allowing me to face the reality. Again, meaning based, purpose related, and transcendent. That's spiritual. Religious, actually, the word religare is Latin, and it means to bind fast, to rebind, join, or connect. Religious practice, therefore, reconnects us both to the divine and or each other. And we typically link up with people who share common beliefs and practices. So finally, and probably most poignantly, self-image distress is actually spiritual. It's deeper than purely psychological. If you're struggling with your own personal identity, your sense of self, your dignity, I don't know who I am anymore. If your values or your feeling of purpose in life, your beliefs and faith practices are unstable, if you have deep regrets, guilt, shame, self-blame. So a typical comment for that would be, I've kind of walled myself off from her, but I feel really bad about it. I just don't know what else to do. If you are experiencing moral distress in your caregiving role versus your other roles, so here a typical comment is, I'm very concerned. I have these meltdowns. It scares me because I'm trying to be Superwoman and be great at my job, be a great wife, be a great mom. And then also just helplessly witnessing undue suffering in your loved one with Huntington's disease. Oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? So your relationship with yourself is in fact spiritual. So this is a famous sketch by MC Escher. Uh, Perhaps you feel like you're this person that's just experiencing meaning distress, transpersonal distress, or divine disconnects, existential angst, hopelessness in the face of uncertainty, interpersonal or faith community disruptions, intrapersonal or self-image distress, performance in life distress, any of those things, then you're experiencing spiritual suffering. Maybe you're on some form of nihilistic, eternally recurring and disorienting loop like this Escher sketch suggests. So what to do? Well, first I have to say, this is a lot easier said than done. And I can't imagine, for the HD caregivers watching this, I can't imagine being in your shoes. I really can't. Um, and, do your best to try and get out of that dysphoric loop. Detach from unsupportive religious relationships. Um, Kind of like our previous speaker, Dr. Chupke said, fake it until you make it. Uh, this is a lot easier said than done. So this first one, find someone who cares without judgment or bias and actively listens. Someone that can give you unconditional positive regard. Maybe you have to pay them. Maybe it's a counselor. Maybe it's a therapist. Maybe it's a psychiatrist. Maybe it's a spiritual leader who can provide you unconditional positive regard and actively listen to you. But part of that unconditional positive regard is someone who will let you talk about it when you want to, but also just go to a safe place and live life without talking about it if you don't want to. Um, Active problem solving, of course, is very important. Um, that's a really good coping skill. Seek psychological, social, or spiritual religious support. Set boundaries. Practice good self care, like Dr. Chepke was talking about. Exercise, diet, sleep. Exercise what agency you have. Act on your plans. Don't be passive. But then processing and lamenting your grief, your anger at God, your ambivalence, your fear, your anxiety, your guilt, your sadness, practicing self-forgiveness, all of those are healthy emotional management. And then the bottom two bullet points here are kind of get us back to the creative transcendent coping. Seek peace, self awareness, forgiveness, grace, love. Accept reality with meaning and purpose reconstruction. Reframe your hope based on the meaning beneath the relationship. Experience joy in the now, so to speak. Again, a lot easier said than done. My dog seems to do a great job of that. My dog is always joyful in the now, but I have a hard time with that, and I don't take care of a loved one with Huntington's disease. Embrace the aesthetics, art, music, gratitude, humor, faith. Embrace mystery and unknowing. Practice reflection, mindfulness meditation, contemplative prayer. Collaborate with your God image and practice self compassion. So, again, and by the way, the mindful meditation, I'll just say one thing about that briefly. There's no goal to contemplative prayer or mindful meditation, including the goals of stress reduction or emptying your mind. It's not about that. It's more about achieving some level of self reflection. So, again, we're back to meaning making. Hope, too, is the undergirding meaning of our relationships and our connectedness with others, be that your HD loved one, your friends, your family, your faith community, nature, the world, whatever you call sacred. Hope reframing requires intense meaning reconstruction, but this is spiritual, creative, transcendent coping. So I will just leave you with the Serenity Prayer by Reinhold Niebuhr. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Thank you.